Hi everyone, this video is part 6 of the unit on clinical psychology and AP psychology. This particular video will cover personality disorders, and to start with, personality disorders are characterized when someone is exhibiting behavior patterns. Think of what you might consider personality, and these personality traits that you might consider as a personality trait is disruptive, it's inflexible, it's enduring, and it's impairing their social functioning. Typically, these are stable over time, and it is deviant from what is expected of typical or normal behavior in a cultural setting. So as far as onset, when this is likely to occur, when symptoms start to show, are in adolescence and early adulthood. The prevalence is different between each different personality disorder. Some are more common than others, and I will cover the 10 that are covered in the DSM in this slideshow presentation, but altogether personality disorders make up about 10 to 13% of the population. This information comes from the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the DSM. It's currently on the 5th volume, and this is just the big book that medical professionals use to classify, define, and then helps them give guidelines in how to diagnose someone based on their symptoms. So, to start with, personality disorders are categorized in clusters. So there are some that have similarities in their descriptions and the different aspects, and so they're placed together in a cluster. So cluster A will be what I cover first. Cluster A personality disorders are related in that the disorders are described as odd or eccentric. Cluster B are personality disorders that are similar in that they are considered emotional or dramatic or even erratic. Cluster C is a group of personality disorders that are similar in that some of the basis of these disorders are anxiety or fearfulness. So to start with, in cluster A is paranoid personality disorder. Paranoid personality disorder is characterized by a pattern of distrust and suspiciousness. So a person with paranoid personality disorder is going to believe that other people have malicious motives or intentions. They're likely going to doubt the loyalty of their friends and their family members and even their coworkers. They might feel like people are just using them, so they might not want to confide in others. They might feel like comments people make actually have hidden meanings that are hurtful and demeaning and threatening. They're typically going to be suspicious just across the board in their relationships that are unwarranted without justification, but just feeling distrustful of friends, family, coworkers, and people that they come into contact with. The next personality disorder is in cluster A, and it's called schizoid personality disorder. Schizoid personality disorder is characterized by a pattern of being detached from relationships and social settings. It is not because they're afraid of them or they are worried of being rejected. That's not it at all. They actually don't have the desire for relationships, and they prefer social and isolated activities. It's pretty pervasive across their life, just feeling detached from others, and they typically don't desire or enjoy relationships, or this could even go into just being a part of a family and just even disconnecting from family members. They typically are indifferent to praise and criticism. That other people might describe them as being emotionally cold, and they just prefer to be separate from others, and that's part of schizoid. When I hear schizoid, I remember schizoid because to me schizoid sounds like a void. But you also want to remember that it is not out of fear of rejection. It's just a lack of desire for friendships and relationships. The next personality disorder in cluster A is schizotypal personality disorder, and this is characterized by a pattern of difficulty and discomfort in relationships, but it's also combined with some cognitive issues, perceptual distortions, eccentric behaviors. A lot of times it's described as being eccentric, odd, or just going really against social norms. So it's this combination of this, they're having social and relational deficits, but also exhibiting eccentric behaviors. They might show very odd beliefs, oftentimes described as magical or very fantasy-like ideas, possibly delusional ideas, but they're going to have peculiar behaviors, maybe peculiar dress, peculiar conversations or beliefs about the world, and this is schizotypal personality disorder. Cluster B is antisocial personality disorder, and I would say students guessing on an AP exam often guess this wrong because they think of antisocial as being not outgoing, like the antithesis of outgoing, like introverted. And that is not what antisocial personality disorder is. In fact, when you hear antisocial in psychology, it's often referring to behaviors that are not kind behavior. So an antisocial behavior would be an unkind behavior. So that's the word antisocial, but let's talk about this disorder, antisocial personality disorder. This is characterized by having a lack of conscience or a lack of remorse for wrongdoing. People with antisocial personality disorder also have a lack of regard for other people's feelings. They typically don't feel empathetic or have a difficulty understanding and connecting with how someone else feels. In order to be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, the person will need to have 3 of the following characteristics. Failing to respect lawful behaviors, being deceitful and cunning of others, either lying or using aliases to profit or pleasure or get some kind of pleasure off of that person, having impulsivity, irritability and aggressiveness, having a reckless disregard for other people's safety, consistent irresponsibility, and also having a lack of remorse or feeling indifferent when someone else is hurt or mistreated. Next is borderline personality disorder, and this is characterized by having a pattern of instability in relationships. So that's probably the key characteristic, is having fluctuations in friendships or any kind of relationship. Typically the person will go through bouts of having frantic efforts to avoid being abandoned by that friend or those people, and then they might alternate between valuing them and showing them lots of love to devaluing them and being really hateful to them, and all out of this frantic effort to not be abandoned by that person. It's also marked by an instability in self-image and impulsivity. In order to be diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, the person must have 5 of the following characteristics: making frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment, having unstable relationships alternating between extremes of idolizing or devaluing, having an unstable self-image, having self-damaging impulsivity, so things like spending sprees or substance abuse, reckless driving or binge eating, showing suicidal behaviors or threats or self-harm, mood instability, feelings of emptiness, uncontrollable anger, and then self-related paranoid ideation or severe dissociative symptoms. So on the screen there are the 3 markers of unstable relationships, an unstable self-image, and impulsivity. Next is histrionic personality disorder. And histrionic personality disorder is characterized by a pattern of excessive emotionality and excessive attention seeking. So in order to be diagnosed with histrionic personality disorder, the person must have 5 of the following: being uncomfortable when they're not in the center of attention, showing provocative behaviors, rapidly shifting and having shallow expressive emotions, having expressive styles of speaking, maybe showing theatrical or dramatized, exaggerated type of emotions or emotional expression. They might be easily suggestible by others. They're probably also going to believe that they have relationships that are more intimate or close than they are. So it really revolves around having a desire, an excessive desire for attention seeking, and having these behaviors, emotionally dramatic behaviors in this desire to have attention. Next is cluster B, narcissistic personality disorder, and this is a personality disorder that's characterized by a pattern of grandiose sense of self. So this is having this excessive, high, self-elevated feeling of oneself, in which it's probably going to really show through in a lack of empathy for others. They're also going to want and need lots of admiration from others. In order to be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, a person must have 5 of the following. First, having an elevated sense of self or self-importance, having preoccupation, fantasies of having power or wealth, brilliance or beauty. So these dreamings of these, preoccupations of these things. The third is requiring excessive attention. The fourth is feelings of entitlement. Next, they might take advantage of other people just for their own gain. They will likely lack empathy. They might be envious of others or believe other people are envious of them, and they will likely either speak arrogantly or display arrogant behaviors. Cluster C. Cluster C is, if you remember, is the anxious and fearful category. So the first in cluster C is avoidant personality disorder, which I think students can sometimes get confused with schizoid. What's different about avoidant personality disorder is that avoidant personality disorder is characterized by a pattern of social inhibition, but so the person is kind of detached from social settings, but it's not because they don't want to. They really do want to, but they're actually just very fearful of rejection. They're afraid they're going to be inadequate. They're very hypersensitive to negative evaluations of themselves. And in order to be diagnosed with avoidant personality disorder, the person must have 5 of the following. Avoiding jobs that they might have interpersonal relationships where they could potentially be criticized or rejected. They are likely not going to be involved in anything where they are uncertain that they might not be liked or possibly not accepted. They might hold back in relationships because they're afraid of being shamed. They might be preoccupied with being rejected in social situations. They will probably talk about feeling inept socially, or they might feel like they're personally unappealing to others, and they're likely going to be reluctant to engage in new activities just for fear of embarrassment. Next is dependent personality disorder, which is characterized by a pattern of submissive behavior and an excessive need of being taken care of. So in order to be diagnosed, they have to have 5 of the following: difficulty making decisions without reassurance, needing others to take responsibility for areas in their life, having difficulty disagreeing with others out of fear of losing support, having difficulty initiating projects on their own, going to excessive lengths to obtain support from other people, feeling uncomfortable or helpless when they're alone, urgently seeking out another relationship when one ends so they can maintain a source of someone to care for them, and unrealistically being preoccupied with the fear of being left alone. Last in cluster C is obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is characterized by a pattern of orderliness, perfectionism, and control. This is when this is the personality traits of being very preoccupied with lists and rules and order and organization and having a schedule. And if not, then the inability to complete the task, being stubborn and rigid, and maybe even not wanting to share responsibilities with others because they might not do it the way you would do it. This is different from OCD because OCD has those intrusive, anxious thoughts that are pushing them to the compulsions and those behaviors, where OCPD is personality traits that are rigid and fixed